Good morning to all. I am Dr.K.Amutha, Assistant Professor of Zoology, A.D.M College for Women, Nagapattinam. Today I am going to talk about the topic wildlife conservation. First, we know what is wildlife conservation. Contents, what is wildlife conservation, then need for wildlife conservation, objectives of wildlife conservation, types of wildlife conservation, importance of wildlife conservation, essentials of wildlife conservation, economic values of wildlife conservation, methods of wildlife conservation, Wildlife Conservation Act, then finally conclusion. What is wildlife conservation? Wildlife conservation is the practice of protecting plant and animal species and their habitats. Means to practice of protecting plant and animal species and their habitats. As part of the world's ecosystem, wildlife provides balance and stability to nature's process. Today, as the human population increases, more and more lands are brought under its control, and as a result, the amount of natural vegetation has diminished considerably, and so also the habitat of various species. The vast expanses of tropical forest and its inhabiting species have become increasingly threatened in the last few decades. Even in the oceans, fishing so intensive that populations are diminishing rapidly. Fishing, we have become too efficient as predators. Sometimes we hunt species for luxury items also. For example, the elephants for the tusk and the rhinoceros for their horns. They are having some medicinal importance. So we lost these. Sometimes we capture exotic species such as various birds, coral reef, fishes, etc. For the pet trade, thus we have become a species which is no longer in co-evolved balance with its environment. Why is wildlife conservation important? Wildlife conservation is very important because wildlife and wilderness play an important role in maintaining the ecological balance and contribute to human quality of life. By conserving the wildlife and forest, we are ensuring that all diverse species in an area survive, breed and flourish. That's why we are in need to conserve the wildlife. Then how can wildlife be conserved? Wildlife can be conserved by developing protective areas. It means such as national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, to protect the animals and in their natural habitat. The endangered and vulnerable species can be kept in captivity in places such as zoos and bred to increase their population. These methods you have to conserve the wildlife. Then what are the objectives of wildlife conservation? Protection of natural habitats of organisms through controlled exploitation. Then maintenance of rare species in protected areas such as national parks, sanctuaries, etc. Then establishment of specific biosphere reserves for endangered plants and animals. Then protection of wildlife through legislation such as banning and hunting, then poaching, etc. Then imposing specific restriction on export of the endangered plants and animals of their products. Some of the plant and animal species are medicinally important. So we have to impose some specific restriction on the export of that endangered plants and animals of their products. Then to maintain essential ecological processes and life supporting systems such as air, water and soil. To preserve the diversity of species or the range of genetic material of world's organisms. Then to ensure continuous use of species, in fact, ecosystem that support rural communities and urban industries, both rural and urban industries will be controlled. Then wildlife conservation is the practice of protecting wild species, habitats of different species also being protected to prevent species from going extinct. Then the human activities are responsible for the extinction of so many wildlife species by pollution, hunting of species, over exploitation of resources, destruction of degradation of habitats or some activities of a human which is responsible for climate change. This is due to more pollution and exploitation of the forest areas. Then climate change ultimately responsible for the extinction of species in the nature. Some wild species of animals are so characteristics because they become symbols of their home countries. We can easily understand this thing with the examples. The tiger is associated with India, whereas white bear is associated with Russia. The giant panda is an animal of China, whereas Gangar is the Australian animal. Kiwi is found in New Zealand, and springbok found in South Africa. So these are the specific animals of certain countries. In wildlife conservation status in India, what is the status of wildlife conservation in our country? Bombay Natural History Society, that is the BNHS, is a voluntary organization of India. It was founded in 1883. BNHS has been involved in wildlife conservation since last century. As we know that most of the British officers were fond of game hunting. Due to this, so many wild animals were killed. But apart from this, few right things of officers were also playing their important role in understand the importance of wildlife. They were concerned about the need for wildlife conservation, wrote books about Indian wildlife, and declared certain forests as protected areas in India. This is the reason we declared some forest as the conservation areas in our country. Some mild legislative steps were also taken by the British rule in the year 1873. Last century itself we have amended some acts to protect the wildlife, but in earnest effort for wildlife conservation was made only after independence, that is after 1947 of our country's independence. After that this BNHS, IBWL, that is the Indian Board for Wildlife, introduced by Central Government of India for advising the government for conserving our valuable wildlife. After the formation of Indian Board for Wildlife, that is IBWL, subsequently state wildlife boards were also constituted in some Indian states. To provide legal protection for wildlife, Indian government introduces a Comprehensive Wildlife Protection Act in 1972. After 1972, this Wildlife Protection Act is introduced in our country. This act formed for the nationalization of our country's act. According to this act, the wildlife species act for the nationalization of already declared reserves for setting up of national parks and sanctuaries in India. According to this act, there is a severe punishment to poachers. Another important legislative step by the Indian government was the 42nd Amendment in the Indian Constitution. After the 1972 Act, the 42nd Amendment is in our Indian Constitution were formed. This amendment empowering the central government to ensure wildlife protection and acquire forest for this purpose. Later, the Forest Bill of 1980 forbade deforestation of any forest for non-forestry purpose without the permission of the central government of India. Because of the above mentioned legislative steps taken by the Indian government, India became an important signatory to several international bodies such as International Union for Conservation of Nature and National Resources, that is the IUCN, and the World Wildlife Fund, that is WWF. Food and Agricultural Organization, that is the FAO, IUCN, WWF and FAO. Next, what are the types of wildlife conservation? There are two types. First one is ex situ conservation, second one is the in situ conservation. According to the World Convention of Conservationists, wildlife conservation may be of two types, ex situ conservation and in situ conservation. First, we must know what is ex situ conservation. Ex situ conservation is the way to protect wildlife by providing artificial habitats. In the case of exotic conservation, there is a need for the establishment of rehabilitation center endangered species of wild animals. According to National Wildlife Action Plan, founded in 1983, these are some activities of exotic conservation of animals. The first step of exotic conservation is to capture some individuals of concerned species from their natural habitats and bring these to the center of exotic conservation. Then there is a need for the thorough study of the feeding, breeding and other habitats and the disease of concerned species. Then exotic conservation provides all facilities to these animals for captive breeding and healthy growth of their brood. Exotic conservation releases and rehabilitates the young ones of these animals after a certain safe ease into their natural habitats. These are the exotic conservation. Next one is in situ conservation. In this in situ conservation is protection of wild animals in their natural habitats. In situ conservation necessitates conservation of terrestrial and aquatic natural habitats of the wild animals. These habitats are generally declared as a prohibited reserves. The entry of general peoples is strictly prohibited in these types of habitats, such as national parks and sanctuaries are the examples for this in situ conservation. Then what are the importance of wildlife conservation? We must know what are the importance of wildlife conservation. Wildlife conservation is very important because it has a lot of ecological importance and commercial importance and recreational importance. Man and wild animals have evolved together on the earth. All life forms present on the earth is one and all living things are inextricably interlinked in the form of food chains. So, destruction of wildlife causes imbalance in the ecological equilibrium. It results in severe consequences. So, protection of every animal species is of great importance to the quality of life and to the survival of man himself also. So, we will not be able to avoid extension ourselves if we continue over exploitation of natural resources. Wildlife Protection Act 1972. This is the most important act. Wildlife is a renewable resource. It can yield good dividends and even earn foreign exchanges with proper care and management. So, the commercial value of wildlife is best seen in marine fisheries. The annual output of marine fisheries is about 100 million tons of seafood worth billions of rupees. In several countries of Europe and America, millions of people hunt for fish for recreation, spending billions of dollars on these sports. Then most of the wildlife species are providing direct benefits to humans. So, many wildlife species helps to study different types of biological activities. Sea urchin helps to understand human embryology. Desert toad helps us to study the early determination of pregnancy. Rhesus monkey are used to understand the knowledge of human blood groups. Antlers are the deers helps us in determining the degree of radioactive contamination of the natural environment on the earth. This is nowadays the radioactive elements are contaminated the earth. So antlers of the deer it helps us in the determining the degree of radioactive contamination. How much the earth is contaminated with the radioactive elements. We can determine by using this deer or antlers of the natural environment on the earth. Wildlife has great worldwide aesthetic values also. Wildlife beauty appeal to the human spirit. People feel pleasure, satisfaction and happiness in wildlife. Then conservation of wildlife is essential as it serves the following purposes. First one is the role in ecology. Wildlife plays a vital role in ecological balance. The autoecology of rare threatened species, the syncology of communities and the role of abiotic environment in ecosystems are all relevant to conservation. Then wildlife is the integral part of any ecosystem. It maintains balance in nature through biogeochemical cycles. food chains, population control by positive and negative feedbacks. If a species is lost, the natural balance of ecosystem is lost and if unfavorable incidents results. So you have to conserve the wildlife. This can be explained through the following examples. First one, if the herbivore animals reduce drastically or fall short in number, the carnivore animals high. So tiger, example of carnivore animals, tiger, lion, leopard, wolf, etc. would then enter human settlements and attack human beings or its domesticated animals. Yesterday it happened in the Tirupur city. One leopard came and attacked the people's. If the carnivores decrease in number, then the population of herbivores would flourish, which will eat up most of the vegetation or will attack the crop vegetables cultivated by people. Thus, through prey and predator chain, natural balance is maintained. Destruction at any point of the food chain would endanger human civilization. Birds provide a number of services to mankind. It acts as a pollinating agent, fruit dispenser, scavenger, insect pest eater, etc. So, killing of birds or destruction of their habitat would result in innumerable loss to mankind. Next one is the economic value. Wildlife has a high economic value and is an important natural wealth. It has to be carefully conserved and if scientifically exploited can help in improving the national economy. So it has a most economic value. The economic values of wildlife are listed. From wildlife we obtain various products for our daily life use such as timber, firewood, natural rubber, gums, resins, tannins, essential oils, spices, silk, lac, honey, feathers, musk, ivory, wool, egg, meat, milk, etc. Then wildlife is a source of income for tourism industry. The most popular tourist attractions are the wildlife sanctuaries and national parks. It also attracts foreign tourists and earning of foreign exchange. The zoological gardens and botanical gardens are also sources of earning. And then trade in live as well as dead animals not only serves to support thousands of people but also to earn foreign exchange. White tigers and other rare animals can fetch handsome foreign exchange. The rhino horn, ivory of elephants, glands of musk deer, antlers of deer, etc. also fetch high prices. Then people of South America for East Asia and others eat the brain and meat of rare breeds of monkeys with an assumption that it cures insane people and gives vitality. People in South India kill peacocks for meat to extract oil for medicinal value. Fat of tiger, rhino's urine, uromastics oil are used to cure rheumatoid arthritis, gout, purification of blood and increasing sexual powers. So they are eating the tiger. Then many plants have medicinal values such as quinine is obtained from cinchona, morphine from opium and so on. They are used as anesthetics. Then from the skeleton of shrimps and crabs, a chemical is obtained which is served in prevention of fungal infection. Then many plants have medicinal values such as quinine is obtained from cinchona, morphine from opium and so on. From the skeleton of shrimps and crabs, a chemical is obtained which serves in preservation of fungal infection. Then genetic resources. Genes from wild plants and animals are used to help in breeding better crop varieties through genetic engineering. Thus, wildlife is an important source of characteristics like disease resistance, high production, higher ecological amplitude, etc. Education. Zoological garden, then botanical garden, national park, they provide education to school and college students. Then game value. Wildlife serves as game where millions of people spend billions of dollars in hunting of fish or in the recreation through bullfight, cockfight, etc. Their festival days. Cultural value. Many mythological stories are based on wildlife. The various deities of Hindu mythology are associated with some animals or the other. Then aesthetic value. Wildlife is also important from the viewpoint of its aesthetic value for man, such as the taste of wild berries, softness of moss bed, refreshing fragrance of wildflowers, melodious song of birds, etc. all add to the pleasure and happiness of mankind. This gives us more aesthetic value. Scientific value. Many wildlife have scientific value for human beings. For example, sea urchin has helped greatly in the understanding of human embryology, like that rhesus monkey in present knowledge of human blood group, and the antlers of deer in determining the degree of radioactive contamination of the natural environment, a desert toad in early determination of pregnancy. Many animals such as monkey, guinea pig, rat, etc. are commonly used as experimental animal in medical research. Method how to conserve the wildlife. What are the methods involved in the wildlife conservation? The number of endangered species of flora and fauna has increased over the years. Steps have been taken to protect and manage the wildlife of the country at state and central levels. Various governmental and non-governmental organizations have taken up the cause to protect and conserve wildlife by the following ways. First one is the protection of the natural habitats in their natural way, maintenance of viable number of species in protected areas, then establishment of biosphere reserves, protection through legislations by importing the legislative laws, imposing restrictions on export of rare plant and species and the products, improving the existing conditions of protected areas, mass education by giving mass education to the public and the school and the college students, to declare some animals, trees, flowers as national and state symbol. Then protection of natural habitat. How to protect the natural habitat in their way? Wildlife habitats are not stable, so it changes. Changes occurring in habitats is mainly due to biotic succession, retrogression, or to rather sudden natural or man-caused disturbances such as by fire, logging or lagging, flooding, construction work, pollution, etc. By extending our domestic area to the forest. These changes alter the food, cover and other habitat resources for all wildlife species. Wildlife habitat management is therefore the management of succession, retrogression and disturbance. Protection of the wildlife habitat can be done through ex situ and in situ conservation by establishing national parks, sanctuaries and reserve forests, etc. These networks of protected areas cover most of the representative habitat types in the country and provide protection to both wild species of plants and animals. These protected networks like national parks, sanctuaries, etc. have been set up within the legal framework of Wildlife Protection Act 1972, thus providing the greatly needed legal support to these areas. Protection through legislation. How to protect the wildlife? Through amending legislations. Various countries of world have formed various laws to forbid killing of wildlife. In India, the legislative measures adopted for the protection of wildlife are by direct principles of state policy. The Indian Constitution directive principles of state policy provides in clear and unambiguous terms the state's commitment to protecting the environment. Article 48A of the Directive Principle states, the state shall endeavour to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forest and wildlife of the country. The Article 51A of Indian Constitution states, it shall be the fundamental duty of every citizen of India to protect and improve the nature environment, including forest, lake, rivers and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures. Then the Constitution of 73rd Amendment Act of 1992 on Panchayats is also linked to environmental protection and conservation. Then inclusion of forest and wildlife in concurrent list. In this, in the Indian Constitution's 42nd Amendment 1976, forest and wildlife have been included in the concurrent list. This provision has led the central government is not only the controlling protection and preservation of wildlife, but also in acquiring certain forest and wildlife sanctuaries of national importance. Under this, the powers of acquisition of property, that is entry of 42nd of Union list. This is the 42nd Amendment in 1972 by our Indian Constitution. Then, Acts of Protection Wildlife. What are the acts to protect wildlife? For the protection of wild animals and the endangered species, in particular, the state as well as the central government has made from time to time several acts as implemented. Some of the acts are Madras Wild Elephant Preservation Act in 1873, All India Elephant Preservation Act in 1879, Wild Birds and Animals Preservation Act in 1912, Bengal Rhinoceros Preservation Act in 1932, Bombay Wild Animals and Wild Birds Protection Act in 1951, Assam Rhinoceros Protection Act in 1954, Indian Wildlife Protection Act in 1972, that is amended in 1983, 86, 1991, etc. The government banned the exhibition and training of bears, monkeys, tigers, panthers and lions in 1998. The Wildlife Protection Act 1972 affords special legal measures for the protection of wild animals in general and in particular to the endangered species. The acts are adopted by all the states except Jammu and Kashmir. So, it has its own act. The Wildlife Protection Act has provision for setting up of natural national parks and sanctuaries. Then regulation of trade and commerce in wild animals, animal products and trophies, etc. Mass education. Conservation education and awareness have to be achieved both at the formal and informal levels. Most people of a country are ignorant about the utility of life. So, we have to educate both the illiterate and literate people through the mass education. Thus, the following measures for mass education should be undertaken. At the formal levels, schools, colleges and universities should include in the curriculum the study of ecology, wildlife and conservation. However, this remains largely textbook and examination oriented. The creation of awareness and right attitude towards the environment and how everyone can contribute to conservation efforts. Mass media such as newspapers, magazines, radio and television, national parks and sanctuaries, zoological parks and natural history museums can play an important role in promoting conservation awareness among the public. Apart from this, nowadays the social media also play important role, such as WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, etc. also play important role in this. We can educate the people through the social media also. Cinematography on wildlife and the necessity for conservation should be screened even to remotest villages and to all classes of students, so that they develop love and affection towards our life, the wildlife. Then maintenance of viable species in protected areas. A particular species of animal which is rare is given importance for conservation in a protected area. For example, Gir forest at Gujarat, that is meant for conserving the lions. Like that Kaziranga in Assam, that is meant for tigers, and Jaldapara in West Bengal conserve one-horned rhinoceros, etc. Then how to declare some animals, trees, flowers as national and state symbol. A list of animals and plants have been prepared with the help of Botanical Survey of India, that is the BSI, then Zoological Survey of India, ZSI, National Bureau of Plant Genetic Resources and NBRI, allotting 4 species to each of these 27 states and to India. This allotment is based on criteria such as nativity, endemicity, general importance, etc. the states will have to take legislative measures to declare them so and make it obligatory on their part to take practical steps for the conservation. Thank you.